Asylum interviews can last a long time. They can take several hours to complete or sometimes even stretch across multiple days. In addition to being hard on the asylum applicant who's under intense pressure, recalling traumatic events in what often feels like a hostile environment, these long asylum interviews are contributing to the massive asylum backlog. In this video, I'm going to explain why asylum interviews take so long and tell you an easy change that USCIS could make that will make interviews go much faster and also reduce the wait time to actually get an interview after someone applies for asylum. I'm Brian Manning, and I used to be an asylum officer with the government, but now, as an asylum lawyer, I help immigrants all over the country secure their future in America through asylum. Interviews at a USCIS asylum office can go on for hours. When I was an asylum officer, one of my interviews lasted 7 hours. Yes, it took all day. And sometimes an interview might not even conclude during the business day, requiring a follow-up interview on a different day to be scheduled. On average, USCIS asylum interviews probably last around 3 hours. Why does it take so long? I mean, does the immigration officer really need to drag it out so long to get the information they need to make a decision in your case? Well, it's true that there is a lot that has to happen in an asylum interview. The officer has to do 3 main things. Take care of administrative tasks like filling out some forms, explaining some things to you, and reviewing with you your asylum application form. Next, there's the substantive questions. That's the question and answer part of the interview where the officer is getting from you your story and trying to solicit all the information they need to be able to analyze your eligibility for asylum. Third, the officer asks the bar questions, which are basically, are you a terrorist and are you a criminal, asked about 20 different ways. Seems like these 3 steps could be completed in much less than 3 hours, doesn't it? So just why does it take so long? Well, there are a few factors. One is language. If the interview is conducted in a language other than English, then there will be interpretation, and that slows things down. The interpretation will be consecutive, not simultaneous. This means that the applicant says something and pauses while the interpreter renders it in English, and then the officer says something and pauses while the interpreter renders it in the applicant's language. So there's effectively twice as much being said, which of course takes longer. Even if the applicant speaks English at the interview, such that there's no interpretation, a lack of fluency by the applicant can make communication tricky and make the interview last longer. If the officer keeps having to ask for clarification or repetition because of language difficulties, or if it takes the applicant a long time to find the right words in English, then the interview takes longer. By the way, if you want to maximize your chances for asylum success, then be sure to hit the subscribe button and bell notification so that you don't miss the insights that I share on this channel. Now, what else contributes to long asylum interviews? Well, sometimes it's due to poor interviewing skills. Some officers just aren't very good at this aspect of their job. It can take them 5 questions to get an answer that could have been elicited with a single well-formed question. And they sometimes just ask about irrelevant stuff that has nothing in reality to do with the applicant's eligibility for asylum. Another problem is that officers get overwhelmed with their workload, which is, I can say from experience on that side of the desk, intense. And they don't have time to properly study the case file and do research into country conditions ahead of time. So they end up doing those things during an interview. And this, of course, slows things down. Also, USCIS is not very technologically advanced. They don't use cutting-edge technology that would maximize efficiency during the interview. And there are often tech problems during interviews. Maybe a computer freezes up or the software systems the officer uses to perform administrative tasks glitches. Another factor is the country of origin of certain applicants. If someone's from a country where there's fighting going on, then the officer has to ask a ton of security-related questions. And if it appears that a so-called bar to asylum might apply in a case, the officer has to ask additional questions and do so in a very formal and time-consuming manner referred to as sworn statement mode. They take notes of everything the applicant says and then have to read those notes back to the applicant at the end of the interview, which can take a really long time. Speaking of taking notes, this gets us to one of the most egregious wasters of time at asylum interviews, and it's exactly that, note-taking. Asylum officers have to type notes during the interview. They're not required to record in their notes what's being said verbatim, but they do have to at least capture the essence of what's being said. This means that for every single thing you say in your interview, the officer is reproducing it in their typed notes. And this goes for everything the officer says too. And this can take a long time, especially if the officer is not a great typist. I assure you, this requirement that the officer capture everything that goes on in typed notes is something that asylum officers absolutely hate. They They leave an interview with their hands aching from all the typing, exhausted from not only having to focus on conducting the interview, but also performing the role of stenographer. And it really slows down the interview. It's your interview. The officer will constantly remind you to stop talking after every sentence or two that you say, and to take long pauses so they can catch up in their notes. They'll be cutting you off and saying, oh, hold on, please. I've got to take notes and I need you to slow down and pause more often so I can keep up. It's annoying for both the officer and the asylum applicant. You feel like you can't express yourself because you're being interrupted every few seconds so the officer can try to keep their notes from getting too far behind. If I had to guess, I would say that the typed notes requirement adds maybe 40% more time to the interview. And it doesn't have to be this way. There are many softwares on the market that can be used to record audio and produce a reliable transcript automatically. We're living in the age of technology and AI revolution. This is an easy problem to solve. Keeping an audio recording and having it transcribed would produce a much more reliable record of the interview. As I mentioned, the officer's notes are really just a summary, and I can tell you that sometimes they are wholly deficient. I've read notes from officers that are so poorly done that you really can't even tell what happened or what was said at key points in the interview. This would not happen with audio recordings. And here's the thing, in addition to producing a more reliable record, switching from typed notes to audio recordings could even reduce the asylum backlog. There are somewhere near 500,000 asylum applications pending an interview with USCIS, with many people waiting several years for their interview. We could cut into that backlog if asylum officers could perform more interviews in a workday. At present, they usually do 2 interviews a day. If we stopped note-taking and found really even the slightest efficiencies elsewhere, officers could probably fit 3 interviews into a day. And doing 3 cases per officer per day versus 2 cases would be huge. It could make a meaningful dent in the affirmative asylum backlog. USCIS should therefore move immediately to stop taking notes and instead use audio recording and transcription software. It's an easy solution that solves multiple problems. If you're ready to take the next step and get individualized help with your asylum case, call my office today. Remember, we help people all over the country, so it doesn't matter where you are. Call us now to schedule an asylum strategy session so that we can help you secure your future in America through asylum. Again, I'm Brian Manning, and it's an honor to serve you in your asylum journey.